Hail gladiators and welcome to the arena. This is Dies to Doomblade coming at you, as always, with an educational stream. I'm going to kick off this series with a look at the tutorial that Arena gives you. The tutorial is pretty straightforward and gives you most of the basics that you need to learn to play Arena effectively. It gets you most of the way there, but there is always something to learn. The tutorial doesn't get into the nitty-gritty of some aspects of the gameplay, some of the different mechanics that you'll encounter while playing Magic in Arena. So that's where I come in. I'm going to be sort of pausing the tutorial, or as much as I can pause because it's fairly scripted, to just talk about some of the additional mechanics you'll encounter, some of the different gameplay sort of tricks and tips that you might want to incorporate into your own gameplay, and I'll be there to just provide some added context to the different things that are going on, maybe try to explain things that aren't exactly super clear as you play the tutorial. So let's get right into it. You can access the tutorial by clicking the Learn More button within Arena, and if you skipped it when you first booted up Arena, that's fine. You can always access it anytime, even if you've played it a million times. If you still feel like you can find some value in the tutorial, you can certainly click Learn More and then click Replay Tutorial. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to click it. Navi's going to start talking to us. I mean, her name may not be Navi, but it may as well be. And she'll be talking a lot, as well as the sort of NPC enemies that you're paired up against. And so it might be difficult for me to get in a word in edgewise, but I'm going to try. And yeah, let's do it. Let's play some Magic. Let's learn a little bit, and hopefully at the end of this, you're a little bit more educated about the game. Magic is not a game that is difficult to pick up. It is a game that is very difficult to master, but the basics can be picked up in one play session, right? Which is not something that you can say about a lot of games, right? You can learn the bare bones of playing chess from one sitting, but with Magic you can learn how a lot of the different mechanics work, and how you could even learn, I would say, intermediate strategy from one play session, although I think that's aiming a bit high, but well, we'll see how much you pick up. Let's play the tutorial.
You barely survived your last battle, but with some training, you'll become a force to be reckoned with. Let's get started. The elves of Llanowar are impressive warriors. Perhaps one of them will help us practice.
The forest belongs to the elves.
She seems like an enthusiastic teacher.
Wish I had some of those.
Your mana from lands to cast your spells.
So this is the very first tutorial, and the tutorials do get increasingly more complex, and the reason for that is simple. They want to start you off slowly and not just bombard you with a ton of stuff. But I guess that's where I come in, because I can tell you for a fact that when you play a typical game of Magic, the first thing that you do is draw 7 cards, and your opponent also draws 7 cards. In most games of Magic, there may be Magic formats or variants that don't start out with an opening hand of 7, but in, I would say, the vast majority of Magic games, you will start off by drawing 7 cards off the top of your deck, after you shuffle your deck, of course. And just before we play the first land of our turn, I'd like to point out some important parts of the battlefield here. So if you look at your avatar, this is your life total. In most Magic formats, you start out with 20 life, and the goal is to reduce your opponent's life total from 20 to 0. That's one of the ways you win. There are alternate win conditions, but that's not something I'll get into in this tutorial, because that's a little bit above my pay grade and not typically something that you'll see right away, even when you get out into the wide world of battling other players. So here you'll see these little icons, right? There's a diamond, a rectangle on the left side, a rectangle, and a diamond on the other side. These represent the phases of a turn. So Magic is a turn-based game, right? You roll a die to see who goes first, you or your opponent, and then you go through the phases of your turn. There are 5 phases, and those phases are the upkeep and draw phase, or the beginning phase, the pre-combat main phase, the combat phase, which is sort of in the middle here. There is no icon to represent it, but basically after this highlight goes away, you'll move into the combat phase. And then you have a post-combat main phase, which happens after combat, and an ending phase. So every Magic player will progress through these turns throughout the course of their turn. Basically, the beginning phase is where you untap all your lands. There's an upkeep step where you can cast spells and activate or trigger abilities, and then you draw a card. After you draw a card, you move to your pre-combat main phase where you can play your spells like your creatures, you can play lands, and then you go to combat, which is where you attack with your creatures, and if it's your opponent's turn, your opponent's attacking with creatures and you're blocking. Then you have a main phase after combat where you again get to cast spells or trigger or activate abilities, and then there's the end step. And the end step or end phase is where you have a chance to cast spells, trigger or activate abilities, and at the very end, the cleanup step is where you have to make sure that your hand is still 7 cards at the maximum. Right? So if you have 5 cards at the cleanup step at the very end of the end phase, you're totally fine. Otherwise, you will have to discard cards from your hand into your graveyard, which is usually right here, until you are at 7 cards. Right, so we are at the pre-combat main phase, and Navi wants us to play a land. So we'll play a land because the goal is to play Shrine Keeper. Now, lands are the source of your mana, which is one of the resources that you have access to in Magic. And mana is required to cast spells or activate or trigger some abilities. And in this case, we play a Plains.
Good. You don't have enough lands to cast anything yet. So that's all you can do right now. Play another land so you can summon a creature.
Okay, so what happened on our last turn is we played the Plains, and because we couldn't do anything else with this mana, this Plains taps for 1 white mana, right? But if you look at the Shrine Keeper, its casting cost, or its converted mana cost, is at the top right of the card, and you'll see 2 white mana symbols. Those are made using Plains. And because we only had 1, we couldn't cast a Shrine Keeper. So when that happens, the game will automatically progress through the rest of your turns and then pass it over to your opponent. There is a way to put a stop to that, but you can't learn that in the tutorial, and I'll have to show you it after the tutorial. So here we are on our second turn. We can play our second Plains. We drew our second Shrine Keeper for our draw step during the turn. So we'll play the Plains and play a Shrine Keeper. So for those of you who are familiar with Magic, you usually cast the spell and you tap the lands or whatever mana sources that you have in order to cast that spell. In Arena, there's something really awesome, which is the Auto Tapper tool. So if you go to cast the spell by clicking and dragging it from your hand, it will automatically tap the right amount of mana and the right lands to cast that spell. And the Auto Tapper is actually fairly intelligent, where let's say I was playing a green-white deck, and I had a forest here that makes green mana. And I also had, let's say, a creature that was like Shrine Keeper, except it will cost 1 green mana. The Auto Tapper, if I went to cast this Shrine Keeper, would tap these two plains instead of 1 plain and 1 forest. It's very intelligent. The vast majority of the time, the Auto Tapper is going to be the way to go when you want to cast spells. So we'll do that, and we'll see it in action right now. Right, so those are the only actions we could take during the turn because we are tapped out, or basically we've used all our mana, so the turn automatically progresses to our opponents. Opponent played a forest and then passed the turn right back to us because they couldn't or didn't want to cast anything. Now, one thing that I will show you this time is notice I play the Plains. Notice where the Shrine Keeper goes after I cast it. It'll go to the right side. And over here is what we call the stack. And the stack is where all of your spells and abilities go before they get resolved. So you cast a spell, it goes on the stack, and then your opponent has a chance to respond. If they had a counter spell, or if they had something that they wanted to, if they had a spell that they wanted to cast in response to that, they could do it and put it on top of your spell. And you can think of the stack like a stack of pancakes. The first thing that gets cast goes on the bottom of the stack. The next spell that gets cast goes on top of that. And whatever's on top has to resolve first. So if we cast a Shrine Keeper, and in response our opponent cast a Shrine Keeper, their Shrine Keeper would go on top of the stack and resolve first, right? So it's basically first in, last out. Now, if you look at the phase indicator, we are now in combat, which is signified by our icon having this glowing sort of spiky sun thing going on. And if you look here over at the right side, there are a bunch of phase and turn indicators as well, right? So similarly, there's the beginning phase, main phase, and ending phase. But now we are in attacks, and attacks are divided into their own number of steps. So here we have the declare attacker step. This is when you send your creatures into attack. Then your opponent will have access to the declare blocker step, where they can declare creatures that they're going to block with, and then you progress to the damage step, which is when creatures that are attacking deal their damage, either to a creature that's blocking it or to the opponent's face, basically, the opponent's life total. So creatures that are cast cannot attack the turn that they are cast unless they have haste. So the Shrine Keeper that we cast this turn can't attack yet. But the Shrine Keeper that we cast last turn, I'm not sure if it's this one or this one, will be able to attack this turn. So we're going to do that. In fact, I will just provide a little more context here. One of the ways to attack is you can just click all attack, and that will send all the creatures that can attack into your opponent. Otherwise, you can just click into creatures individually, for example, by clicking the Shrine Keeper, and usually you'll be able to click again on the opponent's life total, and we'll send your creature to attack that opponent. Bam. Okay.
You're going to pay for that.
Okay. So our opponents played their first creature. It has the same stats as both of ours. So we'll see now what happens when we go to combat and we attack with our Shrine Keepers. We'll see what our opponent does with their Treetop Warden. We've drawn a Loxodon Linebreaker for the turn, which we can cast during the pre-combat main phase. Now, there is something to be said about casting it during the pre-combat main phase versus casting it during the post-combat main phase, right? And you have the ability to cast creatures or spells during both. The advantage of waiting until the post-combat main phase to cast a Loxodon Linebreaker is that you don't give out any additional information to your opponent. If we play this Linebreaker now, then our opponent knows that this was the card in our hand and can play accordingly. Maybe they don't want to block the Shrine Keeper because they want to save this Treetop Warden to block our bigger creature. So you, as much as possible, you want to save your spells for the last possible moment to withhold information from your opponent. Another thing that's really useful for holding a spell like the Loxodon Linebreaker is it sort of acts as a bluff, right? Our opponent may think, ooh, what is our opponent holding that they have this one card that they drew, they're not playing it during the pre-combat main phase. Maybe it's a combat trick, right? A spell that can make one of their Shrine Keepers bigger. So if it's a combat trick like that, maybe I don't want to block with my Treetop Warden because it'll just get eaten and my opponent's Shrine Keeper will survive. So they may not even block. It's a way of bluffing, and it's part of the it's one of these tactical decisions that you encounter in Magic that makes it a lot of fun to play, and adds a little bit of uncertainty and guessing to the game. So for now, we'll go to combat by clicking this button,
Keep pressing the attack.
and we'll do what Navi says and just keep swinging. We'll attack with both. We can attack individually by clicking each Shrinekeeper individually, but the attack all button does effectively the same thing. Okay, so now we're going to see what happens when a creature with equal power and equal toughness as one of our creatures blocks it. Right, so what's happening is each creature is dealing damage equal to its power to the other's toughness. So the Shrinekeeper does 2 to the Treetop Warden, the Treetop Warden does 2 to the Shrinekeeper. And they basically kill each other in combat.
Pity I have to crush you.
Now we can cast our Loxodon Linebreaker.
That's a big problem.
Okay. So our opponent played a creature that's bigger than both of ours, right? And unfortunately, if we were to attack with our creatures, our opponent's bigger creature would just basically kill them in combat and survive. So all we can do here is play the plains or hold it, but the game in this instance wants us to play the plains. Usually you would just, unless you had anything to do with this land, you would just hold it and hopefully bluff that you have a combat trick or a removal spell for this Baloth. And that may be enough to sway your opponent not to attack. But the game wants us to play this plains, so we will do that.
Destroy your creatures if you attack now.
And we won't attack. So we just click no attacks.
You've shown spirit, but I will show you strength.
Oh boy.
Stand your ground. One of your creatures can block it.
Right, so this is fairly important. If an attacking creature is blocked, it will not assign damage to the player that it is attacking. Right, there are exceptions. Certain creatures will be able to assign damage to the defending player even if they're blocked. But in this case, all we have to do is put the Shrinekeeper in front of the Baloth, make it block it, and this Shrinekeeper will eat all of the 8 damage that this Rumbling Baloth will dish out. Okay, so we're blocking with this, and once we click that, it'll take us to the damage step.
Take down that beast while it's still recovering.
Great, this is awesome. So this is a type of spell that we haven't seen yet, and remember that every card that is not a land is a spell, as long as it's in your hand. When it's on the battlefield, any card that's on the battlefield is considered a permanent. But this spell is a sorcery. It can only be cast during one of your main phases, so pre-combat or post-combat. And this one costs 1 generic mana and 1 white mana, and it will destroy a target tapped creature. And guess what? Our opponent has a tapped creature. The target part means that you're choosing a target for it. This becomes relevant around certain keywords like hexproof or shroud, but for now you can just think of this spell as a spell that destroys a target, a tapped creature. And since our opponent has a tapped creature, we'll get rid of it. Okay, so Take Vengeance goes on the stack right here on the right, and as part of the the casting of this spell, we have to target this Baloth. Okay, so the auto tapper taps our lands, the Baloth goes away,
You're not making this easy.
and we're going to just keep swinging with our Line Breaker. Okay, so it's important to always keep an eye out on these icons, the step and phase icons on the bottom right, because that tells you both where you are in your turn, but also where your opponent is during their turn. And if you click any of these phase buttons, these phase icons, it will put a stop. And what a stop is once the turn reaches that point at the opponent's turn. So once, for example, here, once the turn reaches their their post-combat main phase, the game will stop and let us cast spells or trigger or activate abilities, if we have any. And this is a good way to remind yourself that maybe you want to do something during your opponent's post-combat main phase, or maybe you want to bluff that you have a spell that you can cast there. Obviously, we don't have anything in our hand, but sometimes you might want to put a stop there to sort of say, hey, I may have something I want to cast, and you should be aware of that. Okay, double Treetop Wardens.
Got you cornered.
I wouldn't say that, but it's certainly an issue. So this time we got another sorcery, Blinding Radiance, and the spell says tap all creatures your opponents control with toughness 2 or less. Both of our opponent's creatures have toughness of 2, so this should tap both of them down, which would let us swing in with a Loxodon Linebreaker for 3 damage, and since our opponent is at 1 health, that should be lethal damage and end the game for us. There we go. So one last reminder that when a creature attacks, it does tap to do so. There are creatures that don't have to tap to attack, but the vast majority of them do, and then they just untap again during their controller's next untap step.
Well fought, outsider.
Okay, we beat the green deck.
Yeah, good work back there. But if you're going to battle another planeswalker, you've got to be prepared for anything. I know a guy on Ravnica that can teach you everything you need to know about tactics. Especially what not to do.
I was gonna say, goblins aren't the most tactically sound creatures in the Magic universe, but we'll see how this goes. Looks like we're fighting a red deck. Goblins are usually connected to the color red. And we are facing Mirbo. Alright. Okay, so creatures with haste can attack the turn that they come into play.
Yes, first blood.
Don't worry, these things are basically harmless.
That's what she said. Those sound like famous last words to me. So the computer will decide who goes first, and in this case, I mean, it's scripted, so the goblin deck, the red deck will go first, but in a typical game, it's just going to decide for you. There are 2 types of game formats that you can play in Arena. One is best of 1, where you play 1 game against the opponent and whoever wins just wins the match. And the other is best of 3, where you play to 2 wins. So whoever gets 2 wins will win the match. And in best of 3, you can actually decide if you win the coin flip, you can actually decide in the first game whether you want to go first or second. It's usually advisable to go first because it's basically like having an extra turn up on your opponent. You get to do something. You get to do things 1 turn before them, which means you'll get to cast your bigger spells sooner. You'll get to play more lands than them, generally, and so on. The loser of that first match, though, gets to choose whether they go first for the second game or whether they go or whether they're on the draw. So right here we'll just play our planes, pass the turn because we can't cast anything. More Gobos coming. Yet more Gobos. Not looking super great for us here.
Maybe worry just a little.
Bim bam boom.
Second blood.
Don't think I've ever heard that expression before, but okay. Alright, so
Much defense.
drawing our planes, we can cast our first Shrine Keeper and hopefully he can hold down the fort, take out one of their Raging Goblins. And then there'll be one less goblin to deal with, and we can slowly start to whittle them down. Okay, so us now on the defensive. To block, you just click one of your creatures, click on the creature that you want to block, and then just progress through the turn. The game will do the rest. Ooh, it's a big boy.
I've got more where that came from.
Right, so just a note on that. Creatures do heal damage at the end of the turn, so you don't have to worry about the Shrine Keeper taking 1 damage last turn and will he be able to block on the next turn because he only has 1 toughness left. So what we can do here is we can actually play both the Shrine Keeper and the Sanctuary Cat. And in general, in a game of Magic, you want to be as mana efficient as possible, and if you can cast these 2 spells, you should. There are certain times where you want to hold back. Maybe I want to hold back the Shrine Keeper or I want to hold back the Sanctuary Cat. But in this situation where the opponent clearly has an advantage on the board with the number of creatures he has, and our life total potentially sinking much lower if we don't take defensive action, it's better for us to just run out all of our creatures. And before I cast the Sanctuary Cat, something that you can do against a bigger creature if you have 2 smaller creatures is double block it. And that means sending your 2 smaller creatures both to block, for example, this Goblin Bruiser. And the Goblin Bruiser has a power of 3, and collectively our Shrine Keepers have a toughness of 4. So the Bruiser can only deal 3 damage total to both of our Shrine Keepers, and it has to deal 2 damage to one and 1 damage to the other. It would kill one and the other would survive, which means that we basically traded one of our Shrine Keepers for their Goblin Bruiser.
Creatures aren't tough enough to survive being blocked. Hold them back.
Okie dokie, you're the boss.
Everybody but me.
Okay, so like I said, to double block, just like blocking, you click on one creature to block, then you use the other creature to block as well. Then with our Sanctuary Cat, we can block one of the Raging Goblins, and because it has 2 toughness, the Raging Goblin won't be able to kill it in combat, but it will kill this Raging Goblin. So overall, this was a pretty successful block for us. We traded one of our creatures for 2 of theirs. Ouch. I just want to point out that this card has something called an additional cost. And usually when you think about casting the spell, the cost is, right, if you look at this Shrine Keeper, the cost is 2 white mana. That's the cost of casting the spell. But for a spell like Goblin Grenade, it has an additional cost. And that additional cost is, it could be whatever. It varies depending on the card. In this case, it was sacrificing a goblin. And those costs have to be paid before that spell can ever even be cast. So for example, if for some reason we managed to kill all of their goblins before they could cast this goblin grenade, they wouldn't be able to cast it at all. Alright, so we have an empty board here. We can just swing in with our Shrine Keeper and Sanctuary Cat to take our opponent to 10. And I think that's what we'll do. Again, Navi was asking us to play a land during the pre-combat main phase, but it's just, if it doesn't hurt you, you may as well play it during the second or post-combat main phase, just to tell your opponent, look, I have these 2 cards, but I don't want to reveal to them. I don't want to reveal to you what they are yet. I want you to guess. They could be a combat trick, they could be another creature, etc. Magic is a game about information, and
Inexplicable minions when you need one.
having information on what's in your opponent's hand,
Here it is.
or your opponent having information about what's in your hand, is a very powerful thing. Okay, so I'd like to point something out about this card. Its text says, when Goblin Gang enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. And that's an ability. And when an ability starts with when or if, that is a triggered ability, right? There are 2 types of abilities in Magic. One is a triggered ability, the other is an activated ability. The way you differentiate between the 2 is that a triggered ability usually starts with when, if, whenever, and whereas an activated ability will have a cost to pay followed by a colon followed by what the ability does. So here, if we attack with the Shrine Keeper and the Sanctuary Cat, what will probably happen is the gang leader will block the Shrine Keeper, and then these 2 goblins will block the Sanctuary Cat. These 2 would trade off. They would kill each other in combat. The Sanctuary Cat would kill 1 goblin token in combat, while the other one would survive. I think the game wants us to do that, so we're just going to go ahead and, I guess, kamikaze our 2 creatures. Oh, okay. So their biggest creature survived, both of ours kind of just bit it.
Nice defense. He'd be a fool to attack you now.
Okay, so Spiritual Guardian, like the Goblin Gang leader, has a triggered ability.
Never hold back. Never back down. Never walk barefoot in a goblin warren.
Alright, since that creature is smaller than ours, we'll just send it to block.
It's time to bring the pain.
This is going to hurt.
Okay, so we drew another Spiritual Guardian. And in this kind of scenario, we see that our opponent has a creature with a lot of power. That's a 7/3. And if I can see what our life total is... Okay, our life total is at 9. So this Ogre Painbringer will be able to take our life total of 0 in 2 turns. That's a 2-turn, what we call a 2-turn clock. That's how many turns it'll take for the opponent to deal lethal damage to us. Now, if we have a chance to take out this Ogre Painbringer by trading it in combat with a Spiritual Guardian, then we should take it, especially considering that we drew another Spiritual Guardian that will gain us 4 life when it enters the battlefield. The opponent, I think, is, in a situation like this, more willing to make that trade because their life total is lower than ours, but they could also just think that, look, it's going to take the Spiritual Guardian 3 turns to kill me, whereas it only takes me 2 turns to kill them with the Ogre Painbringer. So they may not block. We'll see how this goes. That's always something you want to consider is, how, given what I have on the board and given what's in my hand and my game plan, how quickly can I eliminate my opponent versus how quickly will my opponent eliminate me? And in this case, the opponent made the right decision and didn't block, because they know that they can kill us in 2 turns, but it would take us 3 turns to kill them. What they don't know is that we have this second Spiritual Guardian. So not only do we have a blocker for their Painbringer, but we gained a bunch of life as well. And this seems like a good trade. We trade a creature that's already done a bunch of work, gained us 4 life, with a really big creature that really threatens our life total. So let's go ahead and trade them in combat. That was a huge crunch.
When they're beat, so you should probably give up now.
Okay. Looks like that life total's ours for the taking. We end our opponent in 2 turns.
Have mercy on me, please.
And we drew a Take Vengeance during our draw step, which means that even if our opponent has another creature with haste, like another Raging Goblin, when we untap during our next turn, we can just kill it. Great. So, goblins being goblins, he's not even going to leave this up to block. Gotta admire their tenacity, I guess. Alright, so we could kill it, but we have the lethal damage. There's no reason to... If this was a best of 3 game and this was game 1, there's no reason to show your opponent more spells and more cards than you absolutely have to. Sometimes overkill feels really good. You know, you attack your opponent and you have a pump spell in hand to give your creature +20/+20, and you want to do that to send them a lesson, but to teach them a lesson. But most of the time it's not worth it. You have to think tactically, and holding back these cards to prevent the opponent from knowing what other cards we have in our deck is usually a good idea. Right, so we just end the game right here.
It's the Pokemon that hurt them.
And that's our second tutorial. Looks like there are 3 more to go.
So let's try a more challenging lesson. He might look like any other man, but his knowledge is boundless. Stay patient, keep an open mind.
If it is wisdom you seek, I will teach you.
Okay, opponent leading off with a 1/1 Flying Bird.
Birds fly free, unfettered by earthly bars.
So creatures with flying kind of have it made. They can block creatures both with flying and without flying, but creatures without flying can't block creatures with flying. So it's definitely a good type of ability to have on one of your creatures. We'll play a Plains and a Sanctuary Cat.
Everything is connected. You must understand air, land, and sea.
That bird can fly over any blockage on the ground.
Okay, so this is a card type that we haven't seen yet. This is an enchantment, and most of the time enchantments can only be casted during one of the main phases. And this enchantment also has a subtype, which you can tell by the dash. And this is an aura type of enchantment, which means that it has to enchant or act sort of like a backpack to another permanent. Auras are enchantments that can only go on other permanents. And in this case, this is an aura that can only go on a creature, which you can tell by looking at the rules text, and it says enchant creature. But there are also auras that can go on artifacts or lands or really any other type of permanent. Here we drew our own aura, Knight's Pledge. We have the mana to cast it, so we'll play our plains, play the Knight's Pledge targeting our Sanctuary Cat.
Good. You've been paying attention.
Now, one thing about enchantments is they can be very powerful, and they can take one of your smaller creatures and make them bigger or more powerful in some way. But they are a double-edged sword, because if somehow my opponent were to destroy the Sanctuary Cat with one spell, like Take Vengeance, like our spell Take Vengeance from last game, they've traded one of their cards for two of ours. Right, so that's a very important thing to keep in mind if you want to play with auras, is that you can get 2 for 1 effectively. Sometimes the trade-off to the power is worth it, and that's just something that you'll have to decide when building your deck. Okay, so we now have a bigger creature than theirs. Effectively, we can race them, right? We can race this Zephyr Gull to see who can get the life total lower, and in that scenario, we win with the Sanctuary Cat. The 1 extra power over time will add up. Okay, here comes a Shorecomer Crab.
May block your path, but do not lose sight of your true goal.
Oh, look at its little hat.
That is a cute crab.
Sorry. Continue.
Alright, so if we attack with a Sanctuary Cat, this Shorecomer Crab can block it and not die. So there's no point, because we would have a tapped cat, and if, for example, an opponent played a creature with haste during his next turn, then it could attack, and we don't have any blockers. So here we're just going to play plains and play a line breaker, and then we'll pass the turn over to our opponent. Okay, so opponent's steadily wearing down our life total. Here's a removal spell, another aura coming from her opponent. And there we saw that the opponent targeted our line breaker with this Water Knot. Now, speaking from the perspective of making strategic plays, the opponent used the Water Knot to tap down our line breaker, trading one of his cards for one of our cards. Now, what if the opponent had cast the Water Knot and targeted the Sanctuary Cat? The opponent would have traded 1 card of theirs for 2 of ours. This would have been the better play, and I think that the tutorial is just showing us what cards like Water Knot can do, but the optimal play in that scenario would have been to use the Water Knot on our Sanctuary Cat, even if the line breaker is by default a bigger creature. So here what we can do is play a plains, and again, I probably should not have played the plains there. I should have waited till the post-combat main phase to play that 4th land. We can put another Knight's Pledge on the cat. So again, super risky maneuver, because if our opponent has another Water Knot, then they can trade one of their cards for 3 of ours. But here, the tutorial really just wants to show us that we can make this cat super beefy and just keep swinging in with it. And that's a pretty big creature. It can definitely kill the Shorecomer Crab in combat and threaten to kill our opponent in 3 turns. Right? This Zephyr Gull would still require 5 turns to kill us. So let's get in there. Okay, opponent deciding to chump block, which is to send a smaller creature to just block a bigger creature and die in combat to save life totals. It's called a chump block.
If you keep to the shallows, you'll never learn the secrets of the depths.
Wow, that sounds deep.
Okay, opponent casting a sorcery there during his post-combat main phase. Okay, we just have to keep pressing the attack here. Push through the blockers that our opponents put up. And we can gain some of the life back that we've lost to this Gull with the Spiritual Guardian. Okay.
If you speak waves, do not blame the ocean when you get carried
Okay, we've got another aura here. Just make one of our creatures super big. And we have a decision to make. Do we put yet another aura onto the Sanctuary Cat? Or do we put one on another creature? And generally speaking, you want to spread the risk. If we put too many auras on the Sanctuary Cat, we're just asking to get blown out by a removal spell. If we put it on the Guardian, at least the opponent has a difficult decision to make. Do they try to get rid of this cat with 2 enchantments on it, or this spirit with 1 enchantment on it? Chances are they'll pick the spirit if we put the Angelic Reward on it, because it's just going to be bigger than Sanctuary Cat, but it's a decision nonetheless, and we spread the risk around. So we'll put it on the Spiritual Guardian. We'll let it fly. And ordinarily this would mean that it could block the Zephyr Gull, but since we have such a huge creature, and it's going to get around this Titanic Pelagisaur, let's just swing in with it and put our opponent on a 2-turn clock. We'll leave the Sanctuary Cat up to block the Pelagisaur, and we should be able to get our opponent next turn. Okay, smaller creature than our cat, so we can block that.
The student is a mirror. The teacher is the ocean. The master is also.
Not sure I really get that, but I don't really get philosophy anyway. I'd rather just, play Magic. Okay, again, another overkill spell. That's funny. We could put the Knight's Pledge on the Sanctuary Cat, or put a Knight's Pledge on the Spiritual Guardian, but it already has lethal on our opponent, so we'll just send it in. And hopefully get out of this hippie commune. There we go. See you, bud. Okay. Looks like we have 2 more opponents.
Okay, you're almost ready to take on anyone, including whoever roughed you up in the first place.
I think I have a feeling about who
Let's head to Tarkir
who whooped
to
us.
learn the art of surprise.
Alrighty.
Watch her every move and be ready for anything.
Oh, what pretty little thing has wandered into my web?
Okay. Turn 1. We only have 1 play, and that's a Sanctuary Cat.
Go on, attack me.
Okay, that sounds like foreshadowing. So one thing you can do is you can actually move the cards around in your hands. And I usually like to arrange mine in order of ascending converted mana cost. Okay, the game looks like it wants us to attack, so we'll just do that and see what happens. I'm pretty sure you can probably guess what happens as well as I.
This is my favorite.
I'm sure it is. You've probably done it a million times. Okay. Cool. So this is an instant. We haven't seen this card type yet, but basically instants can be cast at any time. Not just during the main phase. Okay.
Let her get under your skin.
So one advantage of casting the Shrine Keeper during the post-combat main phase is if we had cast it during the pre-combat main phase, the opponent might have seen that, oh, he's cast a bigger creature, maybe I'll save this Cruel Cut. But instead they used the Cruel Cut on basically a smaller creature. They spent 2 mana, right? The Cruel Cut costs 1 generic and 1 black mana to get rid of a creature that costs 1 white. It's a win for us because they traded 1, we traded 1 for 1, and they used more mana to do their thing.
Your move.
Okay, we've got a surprise coming. Let's just attack. Okay. Okay, we'll play another Plains and our second Shrine Keeper. Great, so we can make our Shrine Keeper a little bigger to sort of ensure against getting hit by another, trading with another Nimble Pilferer. It also dodges the Cruel Cut because now our creature has greater than 2 power. Let's go Shrine Keeper. Okay, there's another Pilferer. Okay.
Aw, we don't even get a hit in.
I've been waiting for this.
Okay. So I'd just like to explain what happened during our last attack step. So we went to attack with a Shrine Keeper, and we were in, maybe if I can expand it here. We'll go to combat.
Careful. You can't afford to take another hit like that.
Okay, so this shows you sort of a cross-section of the combat step. There's declare attackers, declaring blockers, and the combat damage step. If you want a creature of yours to be able to block, and it has flash, like this Nimble Pilferer, which means that you can cast it at any time, you can basically cast it like an instant spell, you have to make sure to cast it during the declare attacker step, right? So when your opponent is attacking, after they declare their attackers, you have to cast your flash creature at that moment in order for it to be able to block, because if you cast it during the declare blockers step, it will no longer be able to block. So what our opponent did was, when we went to declare attacks with our Shrine Keeper, they cast the Nimble Pilferer after we declared attacks, while we were still in the declare attacker step. Then they declared their Nimble Pilferer as a blocker, and then before the damage could happen, they sacrificed it to Altar's Reap to draw 2 cards. So it's a really clever play, allowed them to block the damage, because remember, if an attacking creature is blocked, it doesn't assign damage to the player that it's attacking. So really clever play that allowed our opponent to block our attack and also draw some cards at the same time. So now here, what we can do is utilize this tactical advantage to give our Shrine Keeper +2/+2 until the end of the turn. That will make it a 6/6, and hopefully what the opponent does is block with Soul Hunter Rakshasa because it's a bigger creature, and then we can just cast this instant as I referred to it before, a combat trick, right? And combat tricks are really great at getting rid of blockers. They're really good at letting your smaller creatures attack into an otherwise not advantageous attack. So we'll attack. Right. Okay, so the game doesn't want us to block because our life total is low. So we'll pass. And our opponent will most likely attack with a Rakshasa, and we can block with the Shrine Keeper, make it a 6/6, and basically eat this Rakshasa. So we'll block here.
Cast it now.
And you can cast an instant like this either during the Declare Attackers or Declare Blockers step, but it's more advantageous to cast it during the Declare Blocker step, so as late as possible. You can't cast it during the Combat Damage step because the Shrine Keeper will already have taken damage. There we go. Got rid of their big creature. Alright. So we drew a tactical advantage, and it may be tempting to play this Plains, because why not? But hey, we only need 1 mana to cast this tactical advantage. And leaving this Plains in hand can sort of be a bluff to our opponent that, hey, we may have more good stuff in hand than we actually do. Because we only have 1 good thing in hand, but now we're bluffing that we have more than 1. I'm not sure if I think the game wants us to attack because the opponent doesn't have a creature that can crack back at us or attack us on their next turn. So we'll attack here. Okay, there's another Pilferer. And another Pilferer.
You've fallen right into my trap.
How many Pilferers is that? That's 4. Okay, so opponent cast those Pilferers during the Declare Attacker step. Now they're blocking our Shrine Keeper, and we can make him bigger and eat those 2 Nimble Pilferers. Awesome. We'll keep the Plains in hand because we don't really need it. Okay, so the game wants us to play a land every turn. Usually, in general, that is some good advice, but if you don't really have anything to cast, then it's nice to leave those lands in hand just to bluff that you have something. Okay, we'll attack again.
Looks like you've let your guard down.
Another Pilferer. The hits just keep coming. 3 Pilferers. Okay. So usually you can only have 4 of each card, except for basic lands in your deck. Opponent has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Nimble Pilferers, but usually you would only be able to have 4. So this is an instant that, if we're attacked, gives us 3 1/1 White Spirit creatures tokens with flying. We'll cast that during the Declare Attacker step, so we can block with them. And here we go. We can just... We're trading up here. We're sending a 1/1 to block a 2/1. And we spent 5 mana to stop 6 mana worth of creatures and 3 cards. We also spent 1 card to get rid of 3 cards. Which is what you would call card advantage.
Die.
Great.
Now you've got her.
We make our creature bigger with this Angelic Reward, and we've got lethal. Bam. Alright, on to the last one. Another one bites the dust. Could it be a huge dragon overlord?
After I annihilated you, I really didn't expect to see you again.
The oldest dragon planeswalker who constantly refers to himself in the 3rd person. You gotta love fantasy tropes. Alright, let's face this dude. We are prepared, for sure. We got this. Ain't no stopping us now. We're on the move. Okay, here we go.
I'll make a deal with you, Planeswalker. Defeat me, and I'll let you go.
Shouldn't be too hard.
And you will serve me for eternity.
Okay.
Fight as
Play
if
plans and we'll pass the turn. Like I said, the game automatically passes it if you have nothing to do. Okay, always good to keep an eye out on the step and phase indicators on the bottom right. And when Miasmic Mummy enters the battlefield, each player discards a card. We have an excess of lands. We have 3 lands in hand, and we only need 2 lands in hand to be able to cast even our most expensive spell, so we can get rid of 1 plains.
Did he just throw away a dragon?
Not so far. I do as I choose with what is mine. And it's all mine.
Okay, we'll cast a Shrine Keeper here. Most likely, we'll just end up trading with the Miasmic Mummy. Oh, okay, never mind.
Everything here exists or perishes at my whim.
We get it, we get it. You're omnipotent and evil, etc., etc. Okay. Next logical play is the Linebreaker. So this could trade with the Mummy.
Power is the only thing that matters.
Not a great trade because this one only costs 2 mana. Okay. So in the situation that opponent Nicol Bolas was in last turn, I would have attacked with the Mummy and tried to force a trade with a Linebreaker. Right, you're trading a 2-mana creature for a 3-mana creature. It's a good trade. Now we can attack with the Linebreaker, and if Bolas blocks with the Mummy, we can use tactical advantage to make our Linebreaker bigger. Alright, here we go.
I will let nothing stand in the way of what I seek. Not even death.
Oh. So there are decks and strategies that utilize the graveyard as a resource. So putting things into the graveyard as part of cost, for example, like you have to discard a card to cast this spell, isn't necessarily a bad thing for some decks, because as we can see with Nicol Bolas, you can just bring them back. Definitely something to consider if you're playing against black decks or sometimes white decks. Green-black decks, is they have a tendency to bring creatures back from the graveyard, so they're never truly gone. Alright, so for a beginner, it might be tempting to just hold this Loxodon Linebreaker back, but keep in mind this Linebreaker cannot block this dragon. So the best thing to do is just to keep attacking. And then hopefully, the hope is to draw into something that can answer this Volcanic Dragon. Either way, to remove it, or a creature that is big enough to block it or trade with it. Okay, we'll play the Plains and the Guardian to sort of insulate our life total a bit.
Enough of this.
Ooh. So, this is an interesting spell, and it reads, when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. So, instants and sorceries are spells that can be copied. And what that means is, for example, if you cast another Rise from the Grave, it would be copied once. So it's basically like casting 2 Rise from the Grave. The second copy, though, is not cast, which matters for spells or permanents that care about stuff being cast. A copy of a spell is not cast. It just appears out of nowhere as a copy of the spell that you're copying. Okay. So he is copying Seismic Rupture. Deals 2 damage to each creature without flying, which kills all of our creatures, unfortunately. Opponent has the biggest creature as the only creature on board, and we are in trouble. All we can do is cast our Inspiring Commander, which, again, can't block the Volcanic Dragon, because it's a ground creature without reach, and it's also got poor attack stats, so we can't effectively race Nicol Bolas with his Volcanic Dragon. Wow. That is a huge advantage for our opponents. Right, drawing something like 7 cards, a spell like Overflowing Insight, is a spell that can just end the game. So what we have to do now is just hope to heaven that we draw into something good, an answer to the Volcanic Dragon. And this is an instance where you want to cast a Shrine Keeper before combat, because maybe we can draw one of those auras that make our Inspiring Commander bigger, so that we can effectively race Nicol Bolas and his Volcanic Dragon. Right? Inspiring Commander has a triggered ability. Whenever a smaller creature enters the battlefield, we draw a card and gain 1 life. Alright, and we're still looking for something that can answer the dragon, so we're going to cast this other Shrine Keeper. And it's also nice to gain that life. And we found the answer. Take Vengeance. Right, our opponent is tapped out. They can't do anything in response, so we may as well use it. Our opponent knows that we're basically, if we kill the Volcanic Dragon, we're just going to attack with the Inspiring Commander. So let's just go ahead and do that. And here we go swinging.
There'll be nothing left of you either.
Okay. Ooh. Wow. That's even bigger than the Volcanic Dragon.
All succumb to Bolas.
Okay, we can't profitably attack into that, so we're just going to wait. And cast this when Chaos Maw attacks, and see what happens. We might draw an answer for the Chaos Maw.
Hold back, so you can prepare for his attack.
We also don't want to get the commander killed in combat, because then the Confront Assault doesn't gain us life and draw us cards. So we'll just pass our turn over to our opponent. Oh gosh, another Volcanic Dragon. Okay, let's cast this now. Okay.
I've underestimated you.
Looks like the game wants us to take out the dragon, and in this case I think I would agree. We can use this tactical advantage on one of our spirits to make it a 3/3, and if we double block it with another spirit, that's a 3/3 and a 1/1, so that's 4 power blocking a dragon with 4 toughness. So I think we'll do that. And the other consideration here is do we block the Chaos Maw with this spirit and just chump block it? And in that kind of scenario, it's probably best to just let it through, because 6 damage isn't lethal. It takes us to 9. And there's still hope we can find an answer to the Chaos Maw, like another Take Vengeance. Okay, so we'll just block with these 2. we'll use tactical advantage on one of these walking spirits. So we'll be able to trade with the volcanic dragon.
Congratulations. Actually beginning to irritate me.
That's the point, I guess. Cool. So we'll play the cat, look for an answer. Take vengeance would be nice, because this draws us a card and gains us a life. Ooh. Okay. So if we attack with the commander and spirit, it takes Bolas to 11, and then we can cast the Serra Angel on our post-combat main phase, and also play the planes. And then on our opponent's turn, when they go to attack with the Chaos Maw, we can use tactical advantage on the Serra Angel and block the Chaos Maw and kill it in combat. So I think we'll do that. And it should be a huge blowout. I don't think Bolas is expecting this Angel, which is smaller than his Chaos Maw, to be able to turn the tide of the battle.
An angel. Do you
Yep.
think I'm an angel?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
My power is beyond that of a god.
And yet. And yet. Ooh. Wow. Okay. That's quite a board. Okay, we'll block and use this tactical advantage as a combat trick, like we talked about last turn. Oh, I didn't realize that the tactical advantage would only have made it a 6/6. Okay, it looks like we want to if we cast this on the Sanctuary Cat, it becomes a 4/5, which lets it trade with the Renegade Demon. And we'll still have this spirit left over. And the reason I want the spirit to be left over is even if we lose the cat to the demon, the spirit can still attack over the ancient crab. Alright, so we'll pass turn and see what our opponent wants to do.
Let's finish it.
Alright, we won't block the crab because doing so would just kill our spirit, and it's only 1 damage. So we'll block the demon. We got 2 for 1 there. We lost the Angelic Reward and the Sanctuary Cat. But it was necessary to get rid of that demon. So now we'll attack with the spirit because we have a Spiritual Guardian to come in as backup and to gain us a little bit of life. Alright, we can just block with the Spiritual Guardian, and these 2 creatures should basically just bounce off each other. Okay, again, we'll just keep attacking with the Spirit. Although, now that we have 4 power on the battlefield, it might be better just to press our advantage and put our opponent on a faster clock. This is a 3-turn clock, it's 4 damage, kills our opponent in 3 turns. This 1/5 crab kills us in 13 turns, so we're just gonna push it. Okay, take 1 here, not a big deal. Just keep pushing. And we'll hold this plains just to see if we can bluff that we have a spell in hand instead of a land. Okay, looks like that's it. Got the opponent on the ropes. This is lethal damage. Goodbye, Bolas.
I'm impressed.
I wasn't, for what it's worth. Awesome.
Woohoo! That dragon better think twice before he tries messing with you again.
Okay, and that was it for the tutorial. Like I said, the tutorial shows you most of what you need to get started in Arena. There are, of course, there are a nearly limitless number of interactions you can experience in the game that you'll only learn by playing. And as part of this series, I'm just going to be going through a lot of the same experiences that a new player, a beginner player would be going through, and explaining some of the more obscure or more tricky rules, questions, and gameplay interactions that you might encounter. So I stream basically every day. I alternate between doing these beginner / free-to-play player guides and doing quick draft, which is where I think you can do a lot to build your collection. So just tune in, subscribe, or follow me at twitch.tv/dies_2 _Doomblade. And I hope to see you in the arena.